Hello, my name is Tim Shoebridge. In this video I'm going to try and show you as concisely as I can how I import samples into the Waldorf Quantum and set them up in patches. Quite a number of people have been asking me over the last few months how I go about it, how do you get the samples into the synth, how do you create a patch out of them. So that's what I'm going to try and show you in this video. Now there's two basic ways of getting samples into the synth. Either you record them inside the synth directly or you import them via a USB stick or an SD card. I'm going to show you the SD card route because that's how I use the Quantum most of the time. Hopefully I'll come up with a video another time that shows you about recording directly into the synth, but this is just importing samples that you've already recorded on your PC or external recorder and want to bring them into the synth. Okay, so I'm just showing you here on the screen, it's my Windows PC. I'm just showing you a folder here where I've got some samples. These samples are 44.1 kilohertz, they're 32-bit. All I can really say about recording your own samples is keep them as small as possible, honestly, because at the end of the day, you don't have much room inside the Quantum or the Iridium for storage of samples. The other thing I'll say is just a tip really, is to name them in a way that you can recognize when you get them onto the synth. These are samples of me playing the 6 strings of a steel strung guitar. I'm playing the harmonics of them, and I've named them so that it's easy for me to know. So I've got 6 strings numbered 1 to 6, and I've also got what the pitch of those samples is. So they're an E, then an A, then a D, G, B, and then a top E. And then I've got A and B because I've recorded 2 attempts at each of these recordings, so that I'm going to load them into the synth and have a round robin of 2 to give a little bit of sort of like a more natural feel to the sound once they're imported and played. So that is my little folder of samples. I literally just copy those straight onto an SD card, stick the SD card into the synth, and this is what we get. Right, so let's turn our attention to the Quantum now. Reading glasses on because I can't see the screen otherwise. And I've got my SD card inserted into the back of the Quantum with my samples in. Now the way that I work in terms of importing samples onto the Quantum is that I start off with an initialized patch, which is when we have oscillator 1 in wavetable mode playing a sine wave. Now the reason why I do that is because sometimes, especially with samples that are recorded with acoustic instruments, for example, the pitch of them might not be exactly as you expect, and it's good to have some sort of tuning reference available to you to just check the pitch of the samples, and having a waveform like this available in an oscillator really helps. Now the Quantum doesn't have, and the Iridium as well, they don't have a sort of like a dedicated menu system for doing sample housekeeping, importing, exporting, and sort of managing folders, etc. There's no dedicated menu option for that. You have to actually go into a particle engine, and then you'll get the opportunity to do sample housekeeping at that point. So that's what we need to do. I'm just going to go and load a particle engine into oscillator number 2. And now we've got this actions button here where we can import samples into the Quantum. So I'm going to choose that import there. Now by default the import samples routine here is looking at the USB drive, and I don't have a USB drive plugged in. So let's just touch on that, and now it's looking at my SD card, and you'll see here that I've got a bunch of different folders in my SD card, and the samples that I want to bring into the Quantum are in this folder here called harmonics, and there you can see my samples. Now you could touch on them one at a time and import them one at a time, and if you don't have that many, that's absolutely fine. But with this number, what I'm going to do is just touch on the folder itself and then import the whole folder. Now you'll notice when I touch on import, it goes ahead and does it. It doesn't ask me where to import them to, which is a bit of a shame. It literally just dumps them in the root folder of the samples area of storage in the synth. And you can see there it's saying imported to samples /harmonics. Because I chose a folder, it's used that folder name and dumped everything there in the root folder. Now that may or may not be where you want to put your samples. I'd suggest that you sort of like organize them a bit on your Quantum. So I want to move that folder of samples and put them somewhere else before I start referencing them in any patches that I create. Now to do that, there is no option here in the menu for sort of moving things. We have to actually go into add. Going into add accesses the sort of like the folder structure, and it's within here that we can move things around, rename them and stuff like that. So if I go into, so here we're looking at the internal storage of the Quantum. If I go into samples, you'll see a whole load of folders here, factory preset, samples, etc. And you'll see there my folder that I've just imported called harmonics. And there you can see the samples that I've imported. I want to move that folder somewhere else, and I can do that by making sure it's highlighted and then touching on move, and now it turns to insert, and I go and find where I want to insert that folder. So I want to insert it in a subfolder called Tim Shoebridge, and then within that a subfolder called Steel, which is my sort of Steel sample library, and I want to put it in there. So once I've selected where I want it to go, touch insert, bang, it's done it straight away. So let's go and find where it's put those samples. Tim Shoebridge, Steel, and there you can see harmonics. So now remember, we're in an add samples screen here. We're ready to start adding samples into our particle engine, which is what we can go ahead and do now. Now you could select that folder and add them all. I would recommend that you don't do that until you really know what you're doing, because what you'll end up with is a particle engine with all these samples in. They'll all be playing at the same time, and it's very difficult to sort them out and make them how you want them. So I would recommend that you import them at least at the beginning, one at a time, and I'm going to show you that now. So I'm going to just choose that first sample. Here we can actually audition it and play it. It's harmonics on a string. It's very, very quiet. But that's the first one that we're going to import. So we choose add, and it adds it into the particle engine. So it's going to play that all across the whole keyboard. Actually, let's turn down my oscillator number 1 waveform, turn up oscillator number 2 so we can hear them. There we go, it's all across the whole keyboard, which is something we don't want. But also it's the wrong pitch, because we haven't told the Quantum what the pitch of our sample is yet. And the pitch of our sample is, it's an E. But by default, it will assign it to being a C. So if I was to hold down any note, and then turn up my reference waveform, my sine waveform, you'll hear that they are out of tune. So I need to tell the Quantum what the pitch of this sample is, and it's an E. So we can easily do that, just turning up this dial and finding E. There you go. Now when I play that note, and turn up the waveform, it's in tune. It's as easy as that, and you can see here in the row that the pitch is referred to as 64, which is sort of the MIDI note number for an E3. So we've got it in there, but it is still playing across the whole keyboard, and what I like to do is to only have my samples playing at their root pitch or lower, so only ever pitching them down, not pitching them up if I can get away with it. Because I think they sound better when they're pitched down. So I'm going to make sure that the maximum or the highest key that I can play is an E3 for this particular sample. And if I show you here on my keyboard, the reason for that is because I've got a sample, this one for the E, I've got another one for an A, another one for a D, another one for a G, B and E. So I'm going to be filling in these sort of like zones on the keyboard with other samples. So this sample, the maximum note should be 64. So we can change the range, how it plays on the keyboard with this from and to. So I'm going to set 2 to be E3, note number 64, like that. So it plays from the E down, above it it's silent. I'm going to let it go all the way down to the very, very bottom note. It's not realistic, but it's better sometimes to have that than have just silence. So that's my first sample. I'm going to now import a second one because I've got 2 goes at each of these notes. So I've got one here called B. Let's add that in, and I'm going to set it up exactly the same as the first one, set the pitch, and I don't look at these note values here, I'll just look at the numbers. I just want to choose very quickly 64. I find it easier to look at numbers here, and I want to choose a 2 note of 64, like that. And by default we're in round robin mode, so each time I play a note it will choose the other sample, like that. It'll rotate through them, and that's exactly what I want. So now let's very, very quickly add the rest of the notes, the samples that we want. So go add, let's choose the A string next, add it in. The A string, I need to pitch it up to an A. A flat, then A, there it is, it's note number 69. Now the range, I want it to come after my E samples, so starting at 65, note 65, up until its root pitch, which is 69. That's the range I want to play this sample in. And we'll do it the same for the next one, which is B. Set it up exactly the same, 65. So you get the idea. It's a little bit torturous, a little bit painful. So I will speed you through the rest of this so you don't have to sit here and yawn while I do this. Right, so we've got all of the 12 samples in here, and they are all in their zones with their pitches set correctly so that we can now play them. Actually, those toppies, I'm going to make them have a range all the way up to the maximum, so that we don't have any notes on the keyboard that don't work. So the next thing I then do is I check fine tuning, which will be playing each of the samples, turning up my reference waveform and making sure that they are okay. And if they're not okay, changing this pitch control, setting it to super fine, so that you can go in and exactly set the pitch exactly as you need it to. I find that I do that quite often with the guitar samples that I play, for sure, because they're not in tune. So I'll do that, and then the other thing that I'm going to do is check for overall volume of the samples. Now these are quite good, but I think these two for this A, they're a bit louder. If I play 2 notes together, you'll see there easily the levels that the A is a little bit too loud. So the way to turn down individual samples is to make sure they're highlighted, go into edit, and then we can set the sample gain. And in this case we're going to be turning this sample down, and let's play the other one. While we're in here, we can play another one, it'll select the other sample, and we can turn them both down. So they're both now turned down a little bit, and that a little bit more natural. And that's really it. It's that simple. Now, obviously, it is a bit tortuous. Here, I've only got 12 samples, but imagine if I was trying to have a really accurately, sampled piano, for example, with loads of samples. It would be a little bit more of a nightmare. It's nice to have such complete control over this whole process, and I think it really works really nicely with the Quantum and the Iridium screen. But once you've done it once, you can save it as a preset. Just this particle engine and all the settings and the references to the samples. Save it as a preset, and then you can then very easily load that preset into a new particle engine in any new patch that you create. So you have to just go through that pain once, and once you've done it once, it's very easy to then use those samples in other places. Okay, so we're nearly there. There's just a couple more little things that I'll do to this patch before I start really trying to use it. First thing is, it's very, very quiet. Those harmonic samples are very, very quiet. So I'm going to turn up the overall gain of the whole of the particle engine. But obviously, when you're turning up the gain, you are amplifying the samples so that if there's any noise, any background hiss, that kind of thing, you're going to be amplifying that as well. And as these are harmonic sort of plucks, I need a release. It's nice. And then with all of my patches, I generally put some reverb on effect number 3. Just so I've got some control here, and I put delay on effect number 2. And what the hell, let's use effect number 1 while we're here. Let's stick a really nice, quiet, slow chorus on there. So that's nice. Checking my levels. Yeah, and before I forget, the last thing I want to do is these samples that I've recorded are stereo samples. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't record stereo samples if I was recording, say, a monophonic synth that's playing monophonically, rather than in stereo. But these are stereo samples, and you're not hearing any stereo at all. Let's just turn off those effects and timing. So what we need to do is we need to go to oscillator that's running the particle engine. We need to go to the control tab, and I set the oscillator destination to be the digital filter 100%. That gives us some stereo, and I'd also pan it wide. So there you go, that's the process in a nutshell. It's really quite straightforward, and it's a huge amount of fun getting samples into the Quantum or the Iridium, and then manipulating them and seeing what other sounds you can create and what music you can create. The only thing I'll say is just be careful as to where you get your samples from, if they're from a commercial library or from a workstation keyboard or some other synthesizer that plays PCM samples. Those samples will be copyright protected, so just make sure that Yeah, great. Use them inside your own synthesizer, but don't let them find their way into anyone else's synthesizers. That's it then. I'll come up with another video which will show you how I record samples directly into the Quantum, but it's a very, very straightforward process. And then the whole creation of a patch is exactly the same as what I've just shown you here. So until that video, thank you very, very much for watching.